Have you ever canoed down a river? If so, what did you notice along most of the banks of the river? See these trees right here? Why do you think it is that rivers are lined with trees? I think it's because the abundant water encourages their growth and helps them to be healthy and strong. Now, just like I'm showing you this picture of this river lined with trees, God also uses a picture of a tree planted by a river to describe the benefits of being in God's Word. Now, let's look at that picture a little more closely in the Bible. Let's start reading in Psalm chapter 1 and verse 1. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. Now, to be blessed, this word means to enjoy God's favor, which includes His joy, His peace, and His strength. Did you know that the word for blessed here is plural? The fact that the word is plural adds so much meaning. We could say that the person that the psalm is talking about here has many blessings. So many blessings, blessings upon blessings, that this person is abundantly blessed. Now, everyone wants to be blessed. We all want to experience peace and joy. And in fact, everyone searches for peace and joy, whether they realize it or not. You know what? Unfortunately, most people search for it down the wrong path. They think that blessing will come from doing everything that their heart desires. But Psalm 1 shows us that true blessing comes only from a relationship with God and from learning and doing His will. What do you notice in verse 1 about the three actions that a blessed man does not take? Give up. The three actions show progression. The person who takes the action becomes more and more involved with the ways of those who oppose God. The ungodly, the sinners, and scornful. People are people who oppose God and even ridicule and make fun of Christians. But the words walk, stand, and sit in verse 1 give us the picture of becoming closer and closer and closer with those who oppose God. Now, a blessed person does not develop those relationships. In fact, a blessed person is careful not to find his direction for life from those who promote a lifestyle that goes against God's will. What are some ways that those types of people might influence you? Maybe TV shows, movies, video games, friendships, just to name a few. I could go on and on and on. Often we're unaware of the ungodly influences that are around us. We might watch a TV show that promotes ungodly living or think that it was funny or harmless, or maybe we're hanging around a friend who repeatedly challenges our decisions to live in a godly way. We have to be careful not to allow the ungodly to influence our lives and to pull us away from God's will for our lives. Now let's read verse 2. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in His law doth he meditate day and night. Now, the word delight here means to take pleasure in and to place importance on. So whatever we delight in becomes the major focus of our lives. Our delights are pretty obvious in our lives. You know why? Because they control our words and our actions. How do you know whether you delight in God's Word? If you delight in God's Word, you'll spend time in it. You'll turn to it for answers. You'll live it out. We're lying if we say that we delight in God's Word and then never open it, or we only use it when someone else tells us to. If we delight in God's Word, then we'll look forward to reading it and learning from it every day. As we think about God's Word, we will begin to live out God's Word. We will begin to allow God to control our thoughts and our actions. We'll live according to His will. So let's continue reading in verse 3. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. To what does verse 3 compare a person who meditates on God's Word? A tree that's planted by a river. Now, the Bible is full of word pictures that help us to understand and see God's Word, but Psalm 1 pictures the person who meditates on God's Word as a tree, planted by a constant source of fresh water. Now, water grows a tree like God's Word grows us spiritually. So if we make a habit of soaking up and meditating on God's Word, then we will enjoy spiritual growth and be continually refreshed spiritually. Instead of withering, we'll bear fruit. So now let's continue by looking at verse 4. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. We see in verse 4 the value of the ungodly person's work being like chaff, or the useless part of the grain that blows away in the wind. And to live like the ungodly is to live a valueless life. When a believer chooses to live like the ungodly, he is choosing to waste his life and forfeit the blessings that God offers to those that live in his will. Let's finish up by looking at verses 5 and 6. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sitters in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. You know, God will not allow sin into his heaven. When God ultimately judges the ungodly, they won't be able to stand before him. He will judge their sinfulness, and he'll condemn them to eternal separation from him. They'll spend an eternity suffering in the lake of fire as punishment for their sins. But when God judges the righteous, he will reward them accordingly to how well they carried out his will while they were here on this earth. They're going to get to enjoy the rewards in God's presence forever and ever. Now, what would you say to someone who believes that you are wasting your time by finding out and doing God's will? You know what I would say? I'd say au contraire. In fact, just the opposite's true. Finding God's will is the only way to make my life count. And it's the only way to make your life count. Living out God's will counts for eternity. Living the ungodly life will forever be worthless. Those facts right there should motivate all of us to seek and to know God's will by spending time in his word. Now, I just got a couple questions that I want you to think about. How much time do you normally spend in God's word every day? And how is your time in God's word affecting how well you are living out God's word? And finally, what adjustments, if any, do you need to make to your schedule in order to spend more time in God's word? You know, we should not think that we can fool God into thinking that we are living for him. He knows our ways. He can't be fooled. Nor should we think that God would let the ungodly into heaven. They, in their way of living, they're going to perish forever. There are no exit signs in hell. So if we want to know what we should be doing with our lives, then we should be busy reading and thinking about God's word. And if we do that, then God will guide all of our decisions. I just want to say thank you for joining us today. This is our Friday edition of Everyday Faith. We'll see you back next week. Have a great week.